On the morning of August the 30th, 1776, the British Army advanced toward the American position in Brooklyn, fully expecting to deliver the final crushing defeat of George Washington and his Continental Army. But when they arrived, they found something that stopped every single one of them cold. Nothing. Washington and 9,000 men had vanished completely in the night, without a single British soldier seeing them leave or hearing a single sound. What happened between sunset and sunrise that August night is one of the most remarkable untold stories in the entire history of the American Revolution. To fully appreciate the desperation of what Washington faced, you first need to understand the world surrounding him in the summer of 1776. Just weeks earlier, on July the 4th, the 13 American colonies had signed the Declaration of Independence, publicly declaring themselves a free nation and committing what Britain considered outright treason. Every man who signed that document knew the consequences if they failed. The British Empire at this moment was the most powerful force on the face of the earth. Its army was professional, experienced, and battle-hardened across multiple continents. Its navy was the most powerful collection of warships ever assembled. Against all of this, Washington commanded what could most charitably be described as an army still learning to become one. Farmers who had put down their tools and picked up muskets weeks earlier. Brave men driven by genuine belief in their cause, but not yet soldiers in the professional sense of that word. They had little formal training, inconsistent equipment, and almost no experience of large-scale warfare. And in August of 1776, this young, fragile army was about to face the full force of everything Britain could bring against them. On August the 27th, 1776, Washington suffered the most serious military defeat of the entire Revolution. He made a critical error, expecting the main British attack from one specific direction and positioning his forces accordingly. British General William Howe identified this and used it against him completely. While a British force attacked from the expected direction, keeping Washington's attention occupied, Howe sent 10,000 soldiers on an overnight flanking march around the American left side, through a pass Washington had left almost entirely unguarded. The flanking force struck at dawn from a direction no American unit was prepared to defend. The result was catastrophic. Hundreds of Americans were killed or captured within hours. Washington rode desperately across the battlefield, trying to stop the collapse. By evening, his remaining 9,000, exhausted and deeply shaken men, had retreated into a small defensive perimeter at Brooklyn Heights. Behind them, the East River. In front of them and on every side, the British Army closing in. And on the water, British warships blocking any escape by river. They were completely and utterly trapped. Washington's position on the evening of August the 29th was as desperate as any commander had ever faced. 9,000 men crowded into less than 1 square mile. 2 days of fighting without sleep, with dwindling food and ammunition. Men who had witnessed friends killed and captured.
32,000 professional soldiers surrounding them. British warships on the river. Several of Washington's most experienced officers quietly discussed surrender as the only remaining option. Washington refused. He called his commanders together and laid before them a plan so audacious it was almost impossible to believe. Washington would move the entire army across the East River to Manhattan, in complete silence, in the middle of the night, without the British knowing a single thing about it until it was far too late to stop it. The evacuation required multiple elements working in perfect coordination. First, boats. Every vessel that could be found on the river was gathered urgently through the night. Second, the right men to handle them. Washington turned to Colonel John Glover's regiment from Marblehead, Massachusetts. Fishermen, sailors, and watermen who had spent their entire lives on the open ocean. These were not soldiers who happened to be near water. These were men who understood currents, darkness, and the demands of moving boats quietly and efficiently in ways no landlocked soldier ever could. They were exactly the right men for exactly this moment. Third, absolute silence. 9,000 men moving to a riverbank, boarding boats, crossing a wide river, all without a single sound carrying to British sentries just hundreds of yards away. No voices above a whisper, no metal clanking, no horses. Every man moving with the discipline of someone who understood that one careless sound could end. Fourth, deception. Campfires kept burning at normal levels, sentries walking normal posts. The complete appearance of an occupied camp maintained on the surface, while men quietly filtered down to the riverbank in small, careful groups. The evacuation began at 11 o'clock in the evening. Glover's Marblehead men took their positions at the oars. The first soldiers moved silently to the riverbank, climbed carefully into the waiting boats, and the crossing began. Long, smooth, silent strokes carrying the boats across the dark water. The crossing took 45 minutes each way, boats reaching Manhattan, unloading, and immediately returning for another load. For several hours, the operation proceeded with remarkable discipline and quiet. But as the night wore on, Washington faced a frightening mathematical problem. The crossing was not moving fast enough. There were not enough hours of darkness remaining to move all 9,000 men across before dawn exposed everything. His officers began calculating that thousands of men might still be on the Brooklyn shore when the sun came up, with nowhere to hide and no way across. And then something happened that no military plan could have anticipated or arranged. In the early hours of the morning, at precisely the moment when the crossing needed more time most desperately, a thick and extraordinarily dense fog rolled in across the East River.
Not a light morning mist, a heavy, impenetrable blanket of fog, so complete that visibility dropped to almost nothing in any direction. Men who recorded their memories of that night afterward described it in terms that went beyond ordinary weather explanation. It covered the river entirely. It hid the boats from British warships. It extended the cover of darkness by precious additional hours at the exact moment those hours were most desperately needed. Washington pushed the pace, moving regiment after regiment across the hidden river as dawn threatened on the horizon above the fog line. When the very last boats finally pushed away from the Brooklyn shore in the earliest gray light of morning, the fog was still holding. Every single one of Washington's 9,000 men was safely across in Manhattan. Not one man left behind. Not one piece of significant equipment abandoned. The entire operation, conducted in such complete silence that not a single British soldier had been alerted to what happened just hundreds of yards from their positions. When British forces moved into the American positions that morning, the reaction among their officers was genuine and profound astonishment. A surrounded army of 9,000 men had simply ceased to exist overnight. General Howe had allowed the opportunity to end the American Revolution to pass through his fingers in the darkness and the fog of a single night. The consequences of the Brooklyn evacuation extended far beyond the immediate survival of Washington's army. It proved to the British that Washington was a far more capable and dangerous opponent than they had calculated. It proved to Washington's own men that their commander could find solutions where no solutions appeared to exist. And it demonstrated to the watching world that this revolution had a quality of leadership that might, against all reasonable probability, actually succeed. Washington continued retreating through the following weeks, losing ground, losing battles, but keeping his army intact and alive. He understood with absolute clarity the single most important principle that would ultimately win the entire war. He did not need to win every battle. He only needed to keep his army alive and in the field. An army that survives can always fight another day. An army destroyed in Brooklyn on a summer morning cannot fight at all. 9,000 men, one wide, dark river, 32,000 enemies on every side. A fog that arrived at the exact hour it was needed most. It all comes back to one night, one river, and 9,000 men who crossed it in complete silence. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves the real history of this country. Subscribe to Historic Warfronts for more untold stories. I will see you in the next one.